For this video, I want to focus on the books I cataloged and further explain the comparisons I made between my record and an official record from a catalog. The three books I will be focusing on are The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, The Complete Tales and Poems by Edgar Allan Poe, and The Plague by Albert Camus. Yes, all of these books are ones that I studied in undergrad in my English classes, but maybe that's why I feel so strongly about them being accurately represented in a catalog. I would add Mrs. Bridge, another book that's similar to this, but that official MARC record had nothing to work with, so it would just be a huge rant to talk about it. A quick note about these three books is that they are all older MARC records that are in catalogs, so they don't have as much information as a newer MARC record would, at least so far as I have observed. So, for The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, the record I found was a pretty old MARC record that was maybe taken from a library catalog card and then put into a computer system. It was made by a system administrator for Ramsey County, and it does not include any summary or physical description. The main information is title, author, publisher, call number, number of pages, and when it was cataloged, and I think what it said was 2001. There aren't even subject headings. The average library user doesn't search by subject often, but these can still be a good way for people to find other books with a similar subject that they want to read if they're looking up on the library's website, because the subject still shows up on the main cataloged page. With the Haunting of Hill House show that came out, I was expecting more from this record. So, for my Dublin Core record, I was using the description on the back of the book, and I found that it didn't really capture the meaning of the book, so I made my own description. The one I wrote for my MARC record was about four people: Dr. Montague, Theodora, Luke, and Eleanor, who traveled to live in a supposedly haunted house, Hill House, for a period of time for Dr. Montague's psychic disturbances research. All of them feel a sense of unease about the house, but Eleanor is the one who ignores this feeling the most. As she tries to learn who she is by herself, she slowly becomes consumed by Hill House. The subject headings I chose were haunted house, paranormal, gothic, relationships, self-discovery, mental health, liminal spaces, and home. The first three are pretty obvious, but to me, the book is all about Eleanor trying to find what home means to her, because even though she has a family, she has a sister, it's not really home for her, and she wants a space for herself. And throughout the book, she definitely struggles with some sort of mental health issue. That is why I included home. Plus, when I discussed it in undergrad, we discussed Hill House as a liminal space quite a bit during class, and so I wanted that to be present in the subject headings. I don't think many people would include this, however. Overall, I thought that my record was way better than the Ramsey County one, but only because I had a lot more content, and I even added subject headings, which they didn't feel like doing. Now, for The Complete Tales and Poems of Edgar Allan Poe. Even though I did use this as a textbook for a class in college, I had to read a bunch of poems and stories in it, my main goal for this record was to make all of the stories searchable and lead back to this collection in some way, and also to focus on the subject headings. The record from the Ramsey County Library website doesn't provide a table of contents like I did. I'm not sure if this was not to muddle up the record or anything with too much information, which mine definitely does look pretty blocky with the entire table of contents in there. So now next we'll look at the subject headings that they chose. They chose fantasy poetry, subheaded American, detective and mystery fiction, and horror fiction. On the other hand, my subject headings were American literature, gothic horror, mystery, fantasy, adventure, hubris, satire, poetry, and death. I could have probably gone on with more headings to try to cover the overarching stories and poems, but I decided to stick with those. I was glad to see that in the Ramsey County record that they had detective and mystery fiction and fantasy, not just horror. Even though everyone thinks Poe is just the horror guy, that is not true at all, and I wanted that to be reflected in a catalog, which is why I chose this as a book I wanted to catalog myself, and I was really happy to see this in another catalog. And for example, that's why I chose adventure for the treasure hunt and the story, The Gold Bug, hubris, a common theme in a lot of Poe stories, satire, which is also featured in some stories, like one with Scheherazade in it. Despite being critical, I do enjoy the subject headings they chose. They were better than I thought they'd be, which is why I wanted to highlight this comparison. I do wish they would have included some of the big stories in, like, a description, because some other times you will look up specific stories and maybe get publications that are just a few of the stories rather than a complete poems and tales. And I think it would be better to go to a complete poems and tales. After you read one Poe, you could read even more Poe than just one or two Poe. Finally, we have The Plague by Albert Camus. I have a really interesting relationship with The Plague by Albert Camus because it was the book I wrote my capstone on when I was graduating with an English degree from Truman State University. In my paper, I discussed male camaraderie throughout the book. I tried to reflect this in my record in the subject headings, but I will say it is not something that someone would notice right away when looking at the book to catalog. Also, this showcases that I really don't know how to catalog well, because I wasn't sure where to put the original title of the book, La Peste, but in the catalog I got this from, my alma mater, Truman State University, the Pickmore Memorial Library, has it in the right field, 240, whereas I put the original title in field 130, because I still only have a vague idea of how MARC records work, and when I was in Koha, I saw one thing, and I was like, that's where I'm putting the original title, that's where it's going to be featured, and I don't think I was correct. This final example shows good things about my record and good things about the official record of The Plague by Albert Camus, and that makes me really happy. For this book, I decided to take my description off the back of the book. That description was a gripping tale of unrelieved horror, of survival and resilience, and of the ways in which humankind confronts death. The Plague is at once a masterfully crafted novel, eloquently understated and epic in scope, and a parable of ageless moral resonance, profoundly relevant to our times. In Iran, a coastal town in North Africa, the plague begins as a series of portents. Unheeded by the people, it gradually becomes an omnipresent reality, obliterating all traces of the past and driving its victims to almost unearthly extremes of suffering, madness, and compassion. On the other hand, the description that the Truman State Library uses is, chaos prevails when the bubonic plague strikes the Algerian coastal city of Oran. I don't know how to feel about simple summaries in general, but after having consumed this book in the way that I have, I think this is actually a very accurate description of the book without getting into the nitty-gritty details. So I would actually say that this description is better than the one I provided, because the one I provided gets a little wordy, while this gives you exactly what the book's about. For the subject headings, they only have two: plague, subheaded as fiction, and psychological fiction. On the other hand, for me, I have death, plague, Algeria, French literature, absurdism, philosophy, friendship, and morality. The last chunk of these subject headings I find to be the themes that were present throughout the book. To focus on the heading absurdism, it would be easy to put this under philosophy, as absurdism is a school of philosophy. But I learned in my undergrad classes that Camus, though he is usually associated with existentialism, actually followed the school of absurdism, which is why I wanted to put it here. And even though existentialism was one of the tags I saw on Library Thing while looking at different subject headings and trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I didn't agree with it at all. Which was why I thought it was important to put Camus' own philosophy into a subject heading so it would be represented. As I stated earlier, I wrote a paper about male camaraderie for my capstone, so I had to add the idea of friendship somewhere into my subject headings. I also think it is the only way the main characters are able to get through this plague is these small moments of friendship and connection that they have with each other. And it is what makes the ending of the book bittersweet when, spoilers, but this is like 50-year spoilers, dies. And so you lose that, but also the happiness of the plague finally ending is even sweeter because of the friends that we made along the way. So overall, even though there are things I wish this official record would do better, I think it actually was really good. And that's what made me happy about it, because I feel like someone would find this book and then be able to read more deeply into it like I did in my class. In conclusion, looking at this project overall, I can say that having read the books, I think it does help me create a better catalog record for them, especially regarding the subject headings. But I found that this mainly applied to older publications. Books like Pumpkinheads and Love Boat Taipei, both young adult oriented books and were recently published, had records that basically matched my own. If anything, just didn't have as many subject headings as I did. This could also be that I didn't follow authorized headings, because many people are talking about how broken LC subject headings are anyway, and that libraries are trying to get away from doing them. And even though Library of Congress is making new ones all the time, it isn't enough to combat all the issues that already exist within those authorized subject headings. This project also showed me that I am by no means a professional cataloger, but I really enjoyed the process. Seeing my own records compared to official records made me feel confident in my abilities, and I think with time, I could get better at it. Overall, it is true that if you read a book or do a little research on a book, you may be able to catalog something better than a cataloger who just got this book planted in front of them and only leaf through it a little bit. Hopefully, this will inspire other nerds like me to catalog their own collections and compare them to official catalogs, or you can all just think I'm crazy. Now, I'm resisting the urge to make actual stickers of the call numbers I created for this project and attaching them to the books I used. Thank you for watching this video! Below, I have listed links to the resources I used and to the website I made that will have all the records I did for all the books I covered, not just the 3 I talk about in this one in depth. Again, thank you!
Hey nerd, catalog this one next.